so there's Middle Earth over one shoulder.
On this episode of the Stinking Albatross podcast.
Like sometimes you only need to meet one moment to make the iconic shot that enters the annals of American history.
So all of that seems really bizarre and suspect, and there's no motives, there's no, there's nothing that came out as to why he would do something like this.
Neither the leftist or the right-wing version of the theory make a lot of sense to me in terms of motive.
These are no doubt steps back. They are backwards.
In Canada, all of our data on abortion is garbage.
And that is definitely where you do not want to go.
Now you got like right-wing conspiracy theories that say this was all staged because obviously Biden ordered it. There was people saying that within like 20 minutes of it.
There are so many people that are carrying water for the Trump campaign that are supposedly pro-life leaders.
Today's episode is brought to you by LaRosse Media Incorporated. They make professional videos to fit any budget, so next time you need a commercial, promo, or corporate video, think LaRosse. Check them out at larossemedia.com. Hello and welcome to the Stinking Albatross podcast. My name is Alyssa Globe, and I'm here once again with my partner in crime, Scott Hayward. How's it going, Scott?
Pretty good, Alyssa. How are you?
Good. No hockey to talk about this week.
Nope, but the Bombers got out of their own 4-hole. They're now 2-4, and they play the Riders this weekend, which is really interesting because we have our big Lambert family reunion, which includes people both from Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So we'll see if the family can survive the weekend together, all 250 of us or however many there are. But nothing that a few beers can't help out, smooth things over with.
And we're here with our podcast favorite, Jonathon Van Maren. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's always fun.
He had to sit through about 10 minutes of us moving our cameras and figuring out our microphones, so thank you for your patience for that. You're a professional.
Jonathan actually came prepared. Like, look at that background there. Jonathan, why don't you point out the things that you were pointing out to us earlier when we were going through that disaster of a setup?
Well, so there's Middle Earth over one shoulder, the original Life magazine with the unborn baby there. And then we have Granville Sharp, one of my favorite abolitionists. And that photo is there because nobody else knows who he is. And it's an excuse to talk about him.
Well, I have a crib in my background, so
yeah, that is definitely winning for sure.
Awesome. Well, we have a lot to talk about, and let's get right into it. First, but actually, before we get into our topics, I do want to say or ask you, Jonathan, I haven't really heard much, but you were overseas for a few months. How was that? What were you doing? Give us the DL exclusive.
That was kind of cool. So one of the magazines that I get to write for is the European Conservative. I've been a contributing editor there for a couple of months. And last year they asked if I'd be willing to go and actually work out of their office in Brussels for a while. And so the January, February period is slow for CCBR. So I kind of negotiated with CCBR to be allowed to go and work in Brussels for 2 months for TEC. It was really neat. I got to do a lot of on the ground coverage. All the farmers' protests, you might remember, were kind of roiling Brussels at the time. Really highlighted how tame the Freedom Convoy was in comparison because these farmers came with, bricks and massive manure spreaders that they were blasting cop cars with. It was a lot of fun to be there, and it was a lot of fun to do the coverage. And I spent basically 8 weeks doing a lot of intensive research and producing essays on a lot of the subjects we'll be talking about.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, there's a lot that's happened in the US. And Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, you have an American citizenship, right? Like you're a dual citizen?
That's right. Yeah, I can vote. I vote on both sides of the border.
So
just
we have
like Andrew Scheer.
Yeah. Is that right?
Less of a secret.
Oh, right. Yeah. The attack.
Yeah. He also sells insurance.
Okay, so there's been a lot that's happened just in the last couple of days in American politics. Obviously, we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about the comparisons between American and Canadian politics. But first, I want to ask you right off the top, did Trump try to assassinate himself?
Oh. This is very goading because obviously the difficulty right now is that because the press lies about everything, conspiracy theories have become normative because it seems objectively insane to believe news outlets that say, like, what was CNN's headline? Like Trump falls on stage. right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of frustrating because you can't defend the mainstream news coverage, but obviously, this is Occam's razor, a massive amount of incompetence that led to somebody getting 130 yards away from a presidential candidate. I think that we all saw how effective his Secret Service detail was. There was a couple of big strapping dudes in there who did a great job. There was also one who I believe was Melissa McCarthy in a second career iteration. And just most of them weren't even tall enough to cover the guy. And so, you know what? It's tempting to say, well, obviously somebody was taking a shot at him. But now you got like right-wing conspiracy theories that say this was all staged because obviously Biden ordered it. There was people saying that within like 20 minutes of it. I spent all Saturday night following the coverage. And then on the other side of things, people are like, "There's no way that like that amazing photograph wasn't staged, and that Trump looking as amazing as he did on Saturday night, that this was something that was obviously good for his campaign." And I think it's important to say, like, I've never seen Trump as a courageous person. I've never bought this whole idea that, you know, he's standing in between us and the elites. I think he's often a victim of his own misfortune, but at the end of the day, when a bullet tears past your ear and, you know, less than 30 seconds later, you're standing up, moving the Secret Service aside and fist pumping for the crowd and yelling fight with blood running down your face. Like sometimes you only need to meet one moment to make the iconic shot that enters the annals of American history. And as much as I'm not a Trump fan, and I think you guys know that, most of the people listening will know that, it was a phenomenal moment where he showed real courage. And I think we can just leave it at that.
I think the one thing that kind of gets me, the human moment, is when he first kind of ducks down and then they say, like, let's get you out of here, sir. And he says, oh, I need my shoes.
Yeah.
And I've been in those situations. Like, I was hit by a car once on my bike. And that you think of like those really bizarre details, like you focus on something. And I totally, not that getting hit by a car is at all the same as an assassination attempt. It was barely anything and I'm totally fine.
Depends on the motive of the driver, but yeah.
Yeah. You totally focus on these like really small, weird details. And so that was like a humanizing moment for me, which makes it seem like he clearly had no idea what the heck was going on. And I think a lot of Americans are trained to duck and they know that gunshots could happen at any point, whether you're in a water park or at a political rally. So that to me kind of signified is what I want to talk about a little bit more is the shooter and the motives of the shooter, what people are saying and the research behind that, because that's what's really bizarre to me. But I don't know, Scott, if you have anything to add.
One thing I want to quickly circle back to is, we're talking about the legacy media and the coverage of it. So Saturday, because this was Saturday evening, correct?
Yeah, 6/11, the first shot tore past his head.
Right. Okay. So Saturday evening, we were with friends and we were about to sit down to have supper with all the kids. And I pull up my phone just to check messages or whatever. And I see quickly on Twitter, like, oh, Trump falls at rally. Right. So that's the headline that you're talking about. And that was initially what was going through my phone. But so this is one side of the legacy media. But the other side of legacy media, you see that I think it's Associated Press, but I could be wrong, that one photojournalist rush the scene. Everyone's running away or ducking, like you said, Alyssa, but this photojournalist is running to the scene where bullets were just fired to get that iconic shot. So on one end, and in my experience, and I don't know what you think of Jonathan, but I think it's safe to say for both Alyssa and I, and our experience here in Canada, dealing, for example, with the CBC, it's dealing with journalists is different than dealing with editors, but you have that on one side. On the other side, you have the photojournalist that's rushing the scene to get that shot. So as much as we complain, and oftentimes rightfully so, about legacy media, I think also we have to get credit where credit's due, because you're talking about courage, Jonathan. I think that's an incredibly courageous thing for a member of the legacy media to go there and to get that shot, which I'm sure a lot of Trump supporters and Republicans writ large appreciate having that shot go into the annals of American history.
No, I think you're right. And I think if you look at what a lot of the foreign correspondents are doing on the ground, a lot of photojournalists like that who are literally willing to throw themselves in harm's way to get that perfect shot. those are the people that have been hurt the most by the culture wars and the
Yeah.
sort of like the woke virus that's taken control of the newsrooms. Because you've got guys, for example, who might spend 6 months on the ground in Ukraine, get unbelievable footage and interviews and on the ground reporting in places like Mariupol, and nobody cares anymore because everybody's so sort of gripped by conspiracy theories that everybody takes every single issue and just fits it into whatever their side happens to be saying about that issue. And the people who are actually doing the shoe leather journalism, people who are actually on the ground talking to people, gathering information, their work means a lot less than it used to because the editors who are picking the headlines, the newsrooms who are sort of setting the narrative for the overall paper, they're really killing it. And like that does suck because there are a lot of journalists doing great work. Like there's a lot of journalists at the New York Times who are doing phenomenal work. But when the New York Times and CNN and NBC and MSNBC completely sell out on all of these other issues, it just completely invalidates all of the work that their entire teams are doing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of you're chalking it up to incompetence, but these are the points that I can come up with in terms of what happened right before the shooting. So basically, they saw this guy on the roof, and a policeman, a local policeman, went up to investigate, and the shooter turned his rifle to him and he let go of the ladder and didn't go up on the roof. And it said moments later, then he took a few shots. One grazed Trump's ear, another killed a former fire chief who was protecting his daughter and wife. Two others were injured. But there's a lot of video going around of people warning and trying to tell police, like there's somebody on the roof. Even a guy was interviewed who was having a party nearby and he was going to go closer to the gates when Trump spoke, and he saw, the guy bear crawling across the roof. So then he took the shots, and then they shot the shooter and killed him like moments after. So they were already lined up, ready to go. And then about the shooter, he's a 20-year-old. He gave to a Democrat nonprofit that was in charge of nominating and electing Democratic candidates. And then he did that on Biden's inauguration day. And then 8 months later, he registered as a Republican. And so if you see on all the mainstream media sites, they're saying that this is a registered Republican, so they really want to push the fact that he's a Republican. But a lot of people are also saying that it was a strategy of Democrats to register as Republicans to beat Trump in the primaries. And that to me makes the most sense. But I guess we don't know what the motives are or anything, because this guy also had no social media, which I also find extremely bizarre. And when they did interview the dad said he had no idea what the hell was going on. Like, that's his only comment. So all of that seems really bizarre and suspect, and there's no motives. There's no, there's nothing that came out as to why he would do something like this. So that to me is the real question mark right now in this whole situation.
So my one comment on that is, so obviously there's an enormous amount of incompetence. To suggest a larger conspiracy that involved the local police force seems really outside the realm of possibility for me. If there was some sort of conspiracy, you wouldn't involve like local cops in Butler, Pennsylvania. And so I could be wrong, weirder things have happened. But one of the things that I think is interesting is that because our era is so politicized, when something like this happens, we immediately assume there has to be some broader political motive. When the history of assassination in the United States in particular indicates that a lot of these people were looking for something else. They were looking for an enormous amount of fame. They were deeply mentally disturbed. Like the guy who tried to kill Andrew Jackson in 1835 was sort of a mentally deranged painter who frequently thought that he was Richard III. John Hinckley Jr., the one who shot Reagan in 1981, also just this really disturbed guy. If you look at these assassinations, there's often people with delusions of grandeur. There's people with mental illnesses. Famous people attract violence by virtue of their fame. And so I don't think that it's at all unusual to have a shooter that doesn't necessarily have a political manifesto online. And I think when we get these political manifestos, they're often sort of a chaotic mess indicating that somebody is very strange, very disturbed. This is true for the weird anti-abortion shooters who would actually perpetrate violence against abortionists. Often these are deeply weird people, living in some tin can in the forest somewhere that don't have any association with a mainstream ideology, which is why they're vulnerable to committing violence violence in the first place. And so I actually think that the fact that we immediately say the guy doesn't have social media, like if he's not on the internet, he's like hardly a real person, because that's the way we all think now. And two, he had to have political motives because those are the only ones that make sense. That in particular is pretty ahistorical, right? Like, why did somebody shoot John Lennon of the Beatles? Because he's famous. That's why. Like the guy who shot John Lennon, he did it to impress a girl. So we don't know what this guy's motives are, and I'm not claiming any insight whatsoever. They're kind of picking over the bones of this guy's digital footprint, and they've come up with nothing so far. But I don't think it's necessarily weird that we can't pinpoint him as he's a leftist operative who thought he was taking out Trump because Trump was Hitler, or he was some on the other side, right-wing guy who wanted to make Trump a martyr in order to ensure that he got elected, which I got to say is the weirdest one, because if you wanted to make Trump a martyr, like next time maybe miss by a few extra inches, because that was pretty close.
Yeah, the other thing too is I don't think it's that super uncommon these days for a 20-year-old to have a very low or negligible footprint online. There's a lot of people, 20 years old and younger that don't have nearly as many social media accounts as you or Jonathan or myself would have, because they just they're maybe on TikTok and that's about it. So I don't think that's necessarily all that uncommon for that particular generation, especially for someone who's maybe a little bit odd, which this guy seems. His donation to that Democratic, what do you call them down in the States, PAC, was only $15 one time, 1.5. So it's not like he was donating a ton of money or was a monthly donor or anything like that. And it's not super uncommon for people to, especially in a swing state like Pennsylvania, and especially the suburbs of I think Butler's suburbs of Pittsburgh, if I'm correct. It's not uncommon for people to kind of switch from one to the other, especially someone who's more of a independent, or especially someone who's a very weird person like this guy seems. So I just think that I agree that Occam's razor applies. It seems like incredible incompetence, because even when they were trying to get Trump off the stage and trying to get him to the vehicle and everything like that, like the one lady Secret Service agent, like she couldn't get her handgun back into her holster. They seemed more chaotically confused than the former president himself did, and others there.
Totally.
I know that the RNC, which is happening right now as we record this in Milwaukee, the Republican National Convention, it's a completely different crew of Secret Service agents, and this has been an issue by the way for former presidents who are running politically again. That they don't have proper top line Secret Service protocol that are following them around. This is not an old issue, unfortunately, and hopefully this issue it seems to have resolved itself already, because it seems that he has a different detail that's surrounding him. I don't know if you guys saw it today or not, but RFK Jr. Had that video out that he apologized for, because they're doing some sort of documentary or whatever, where he was on the phone with Trump calling to make sure everything was okay and whatnot. And you can hear Trump on the other line, and he's saying that Biden gave him a call, and he says right on the phone, like, yeah, like Biden actually seems like a pretty nice guy, whatever. And Biden's asking him, like, well, how do you know to turn your head or whatever? And Trump's saying, well, I was looking at this chart. I want to talk about this chart about these illegal immigrants coming in. And just
the best CNN headline would have been "Illegal immigrants saved Trump's life," which I can't believe they didn't pick up on that one. But like Trump, there was an expose on Trump like a couple of weeks ago where he was complaining about why are all these fat guys on my Secret Service detail, right? Like it's that crew, a lot of them. Look, I want to be careful what I say here, because I don't want to negate the heroism of the people who just chucked themselves on him immediately. But like they didn't do a good job. Watch the footage of the 1981 attempt on Reagan, right? And you've got like 6'7" guys with Uzis, chucking themselves on John Hinckley Jr. without even putting their cigarettes out. Not the same thing. In Pennsylvania on Saturday. So like, I'm always open to the idea that there's a conspiracy and that there's more to this that meets the eye, that there was some sort of planning, that this guy was a patsy. But like, for who? Like, again, neither the leftist or the right-wing version of the theory make a lot of sense to me in terms of motive. And I I don't agree with the narrative that just because we can't find any coherent political narrative that explains why this weirdo did what he did, that there's no good explanation. Like, come on, have a bit of imagination. People shoot at famous people for all kinds of reasons, and like one of the key American narratives. Like, I don't care what kind of movie you go to watch. The key American narrative is like, good guy pushed too far, cancels everybody with bullets. This is just like the story, and a decent chunk of the mass shooters over the last 20 years have been just that. Some bullied, harangued weirdo who was ostracized and then ends up following a very American script of, I'm going to get a gun and do violence for any number of reasons.
Yeah, and I think a good point that I saw on Twitter somebody made was that, you see a lot of these Democrats rage against gun violence, but now you see them all coming out saying, oh, I'm sorry that this guy missed. The libs of TikTok keep posting every single time a famous person says that, including in Canada, where a UBC professor said that as well. The hypocrisy is stark there, that's for sure.
We live in a world that grows through communication.
Every connection comes from a dream to be heard and realized.
To welcome a better future. What are your dreams?
LaRosse Media will help communicate your vision through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Start building connections to your future audience. Visit larossemedia.com
and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
Let's move on to the RNC going on right now in Milwaukee. So basically, I want you, Jonathan, to give us a little bit of a rundown, because I don't know, Scott, if you know, but I'm not 100, I know how conventions work here in Canada, but I'm not 100% sure how they work in the States. And I saw multiple videos of a woman who said, I've been going to these conventions since 1992. Never has this ever happened before. Usually there's committees and we break out and we debate policies and we put them forward and then we vote on them. But this platform was put forward and then immediately there was a motion to approve it, and that was it. There was no discussion, nothing. And they significantly shortened it. So maybe you can give us a little bit of a rundown about how these things work and what actually happened with specific regards to the pro-life platform that was basically taken out in this convention.
Jonathan, do you know the 40 different rules of the Republican Party?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay, because Alyssa, do you want me to give everyone a quick rundown of the differences, and then Jonathan can get into his discussion with the
maybe not all 40, but maybe some main ones.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so basically what happens is this is going to sound very, very strange to a lot of people in Canada and maybe anyone who's watching the United States, but here in Canada, the opportunity for members of political parties, particularly federal political parties, to have a say in who runs the party in terms of what we say National Council for the Conservative Party of Canada, we would say the Republican or Democratic National Committees for those two parties down there. The party members in Canada actually have quite a bit more power than they do in the United States. So basically what happens in the United States is ever since the 1972 presidential primaries, the two main parties in the United States, being the Democrats and the Republicans, have either state conventions or primaries. So, of course, for anyone who follows American politics, it starts with Iowa, the caucus is there, and then Nebraska and New Hampshire, and then you get into Super Tuesday and all that. So basically what happens is you either you register as a member of the Republicans or as the Democrats. You can't be a member of both, and they'll know because those lists are public. And then you say, okay, I'm registering as a Republican, so I can vote in this Republican primary. And then you vote for who you want to be the presidential candidate nomination to be elected at the convention, which is usually held sometime in July or August, later during that presidential cycle. So it depends on state by state, but some states are winner take all. So for example, in the 2016 primaries, Donald Trump was going and winning all these states with 32% of the vote, and then you would have like Marco Rubio of 28% and Chris Christie maybe of 10% or something like that. But a lot of these states were winner take all, and even though Trump had way less than 50% of the votes, because he had the highest number of votes, he won all the delegates that would then go to the Republican National Convention for that state. Some states have it so that it's broken out. So for example, if a state had 100 and Trump got 32%, he'd get 32 delegates. So what happens is these delegates go to the Republican National Convention and they have to vote for that presidential candidate as per the wishes of I'm going to say party members, but registered party supporters in that state. After that, if there's a candidate that doesn't win 50% or more of all the delegates at the convention, then those delegates are now known as unbound. They can vote anyway after that, and then there's some horse trading. This hasn't happened for quite some time for either the Republicans or the Democrats at their party conventions. But in addition to that, they also elect at each state 3 representatives that are going to sit. This is for the Republicans, mind you, I don't know for the Democrats. 3 representatives that are going to sit on the Republican National Committee. So you have a chair, you have your convention representative man, you have a woman, and then you have the chair of your state. So each state basically has 3. That kind of makes your board of directors for the Republican Party of nationally in the United States. Then they have different committees, and there are 4 committees that they have to have, and one of the committees is a platform committee. The platform committee puts together the platform that then is voted on by the committee altogether, and then of course by the delegates at the Republican National Convention. And that's the official platform that you are going to run on for Republicans when it comes to running for the House of Representatives, when it comes to running for the Senate, and of course for the presidential candidate, him or herself. So this is something that's been in place since 1972. And usually the committees will get together about a week or 2 before the national convention, because they have to present a finalized document from the platform committee of, okay, this is what we recommend to convention delegates. And this is where things really, really started to break down. And Jonathan, I think that you had I just read your blog post earlier this afternoon. You had a discussion with this pro-life delegate. I think she's from Utah. You can correct me if I'm wrong. That's been there at every convention since 1992. And I think she's been a member of the platform committee. At the very least, she's a member of the platform committee now. And things, I'm going to say, basically went off the rails for this 2024 convention.
Yeah, so the woman you referenced, Alyssa, I tracked her down and I interviewed her last week, and that report was published in First Things today. And so this takes us back to sort of last week, Sunday night. The delegates arrived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin to discuss the platform. That process was overseen by Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, who has kind of run on a rock-ribbed pro-life platform in the past. And so what Gail described to me is everybody met on Sunday night at orientation. Most of the people there, she said, were new, except for a handful of people she could identify as having been there in past years. She had been at every platform committee since 1992, with the sole exception of one. And she said, so the way it usually works is that on Monday, they break out into subcommittees. They all kind of work hard over the various resolutions. They get together, they have a discussion, they propose amendments, and they spend basically 2 days hammering this out. I was actually at the RNC in 2016 with a bunch of pro-life leaders. And on Wednesday, they all kind of came out of the deliberations. There was a lot of pro-life leaders there, and they were really happy with what had happened. In 2016, they had actually added a list of pro-life commitments to the platform. It was the most pro-life platform in the history of the Republican Party. And so what actually happened last week in Milwaukee that was very different. So she said basically they met on Monday morning, and they hadn't seen the platform yet. The platform that was sort of released, the sort of all caps smorgasbord of Trump slogans that passes for the GOP platform at the moment. Very, very short on details, and very, very like heavy on slogans. So she said they all met in the morning. They all went into the room. All their cell phones were confiscated. Even her watch was confiscated. I assume this has something to do with maybe they thought it was an iWatch or something like that. And then they opened it up for questions very abruptly. abruptly. There was a couple of microphones. Comments were limited to 60 seconds each. She said that right away, people swarmed the microphones to make sure that pro-life delegates couldn't actually speak. And then as she was kind of turning to people and saying, like, I haven't read this yet. There's nothing here about the unborn that I can see. And boom, like Marsha Blackburn called for a vote, called the question, as the delegate described it to me. Politico reported that an unnamed pro-life leader called for a roll call vote on the platform because the proceedings were basically being launched without any of the prior due process. And she told me that was Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council. He was told that he was out of line by Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn. They called the vote. 18 people voted against the platform. As the Utah delegate told me, she's a member of Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum. Basically what she said was like, look, some people voted against it because there was no pro-life language. Other people voted against it because they hadn't read it. I voted against it for both reasons. And by 11:30 a.m. on Monday morning, they were all like back out on the street. And the platform had been released to the press. And she said, yeah, we're usually there for a couple of days. We flew into Milwaukee expecting there to be a couple of days of deliberation and proposed resolutions. But she says basically the Trump campaign had orchestrated the entire thing. One of the interesting things she said is every other year I've been there, everybody's seated in alphabetical order. This is the first time they were not seated in alphabetical order. And she's like, when we were standing to vote, it was clear to me that all of the readily identifiable pro-life or social conservative delegates were surrounded by clusters of new people who, in her words, were just there to show up and vote the way that they were told to vote. Only two, her interview was significant because only two other people have broken their silence about what happened. Tony Perkins released a statement of opposition, but didn't actually mention that he was the one who had called for the roll call vote and was shut down. David Barton of Wall Builders as well released a statement explaining why he was opposed to the platform. So I've been hearing rumors about this for months. This is the third time I've written for First Things on the GOP pivot. I heard from delegates in Michigan that there was a lot of previous pro-life and social conservative delegates who had been expecting to go to Milwaukee. The Trump campaign did their best to identify pro-life delegates and make sure they weren't going. So it was essentially a purge of people who might disagree with the Trump campaign's current position on abortion, which they claim is the federalist position, which is it's up to the states. That's not the way it works in practice, though. This is what I keep on telling to people who are swarming me on Twitter. They're saying, "Well, it's just he's just saying it's up to the states." He's unfortunate. Like, I would understand if he was just recognizing a political reality, but recognizing political reality and explicitly endorsing the pro-abortion platform are two different things. So, for example, he's condemned the 6-week heartbeat ban in Florida as harsh and extreme. He's also condemned abortion laws in North Dakota. He actually cited Governor Doug Burgum's signing of pro-life protections as a barrier to selecting him as a running mate. And so what we have is Trump claims to hold a federalist position, but in practice, he condemns states that decide to sign pro-life laws, and he doesn't condemn states that are passing extreme pro-abortion laws. So it's not really a federalist position. It's a de facto pro-choice position that lapses into overt confirmation of the Biden message, which is that pro-life laws are extreme consistently. This is a really big deal. I really wish that people, there's a lot of pro-lifers who are just like, look, we need to beat Biden. Fair enough. You do not need to do this. Like, you do not need to pretend that people aren't saying what they're saying. You do not need to pretend that during the debates, for example, that Trump only endorsed the Supreme Court's decision and didn't endorse access to mifepristone, which currently makes up 60% of the abortion kill count in the U.S. This is a pivot to pro-choice. This is not simply the recognition of political reality. There is a way to recognize political reality without endorsing abortion. We have seen previous federal conservative candidates in Canada do that. During Leslyn Lewis's leadership run, for example, she recognized Canadian political reality while also identifying as pro-life and putting forward common sense pro-life policies. So I think it's really important to note the GOP is shifting. Trump is dragging it away. The entire process of the RNC was rigged to ensure that outcome. And on abortion, the GOP platform does not differ much from the Democratic platform. Enough that it's better, but not much.
Yeah, I want to go through a few things that were dropped from the 2016 platform compared to the 2024 platform that just got passed basically hours ago, earlier this week at the RNC. Because Jonathan, you're right, it's a very strong platform. So things included in the 2016 GOP platform were defunding of abortions, encouraging states to criminalize the sale of fetal tissue, Federal Pain Capability Act, bans sex-selective and disability-targeted abortions federally, supporting states to exclude abortion providers from Medicaid, excluding pro-abortion counseling in schools. That's important because in the United States, schools and education are a federal jurisdiction, not state jurisdiction. Parental consent for minors seeking an abortion, including crossing state lines to do so. These are all the pro-life policies. Those were all dropped. And these are all the pro-life policies now in the 2024 Republican platform. A federal late-term abortion ban.
And by the way, that's in the same sentence as declaring support for birth control and in vitro fertilization.
I was just going to say, we now have a situation where the Republican Party in 2024 is in some ways more pro-abortion officially than the Conservative Party of Canada, because the Conservative Party of Canada says that Cabinet will not introduce or support legislation to regulate abortion in Canada. Of course, in Canada, abortion isn't regulated whatsoever. But there's a whole slew of other things that we have as pro-lifers in the Conservative Party of Canada platform, including defunding abortion overseas. It makes sure that it condemns outright sex-selective abortion. It makes sure that people who are applying for federal programs aren't targeted and denied, like CCBR was, because they're pro-life. Nowhere in the Conservative Party of Canada official policy document does it say that the Conservatives are in favor of IVF and what was the other one that was in the
access to birth control.
Or RU46? Yeah, access to, well, not just birth control, but especially the abortion pill. Nowhere is that official Conservative Party of Canada policy, and hopefully it's not. So, but your description of bringing first off, making sure that no pro-lifers or very few pro-lifers are going to be on the platform committee. That when you bring them into Milwaukee, that you're basically more or less, from the sounds of it, not following Robert's Rules of Order. That there's very little challenge, that you kind of or disperse your enemies and you don't have them together, physically clustered in group. Does that not sound a lot like what we experienced, Alyssa, in Quebec last September in 2023 for the Constitution part of the Conservative Party of Canada Policy Convention? It sounds a lot like that.
Yeah, I mean, the comparisons are uncanny, that's for sure. I mean, when you're talking about what Gail said, it's like I was sitting right there back at the Conservative Convention. Do either of you guys follow Ed Fazer on Twitter?
Oh my goodness, yes. He's been killing it out there.
He has, but he's like a lone wolf. And I just want to read you this really amazing blog post that he wrote about the GOP the convention happening right now, but just the last paragraph, because what he says that will result in these changes is very pertinent to Canada as well. He said that because of these changes, the results will be that the national GOP will be far less likely in the future to advance the agenda of social conservatives or even pay lip service to it. Opposition to abortion and resistance to other socially liberal policies will become primarily a matter of local rather than national politics, and social conservatives will be pushed further into the cultural margins. They will gradually lose the remaining institutional support they have outside the churches, even as the churches themselves are becoming ever less friendly to them, and the ability to fight against the moral and cultural rot accelerating all around us, and to protect themselves from those who would erode their freedom to practice and promote their religious convictions will thereby be massively reduced. In short, for social conservatives to roll over and accept Trump's radical change to the Republican platform would be to seek near-term electoral victory at the cost of long-term political suicide. Different socially conservative leaders have called on the delegates at this week's Republican National Convention to vote down the revised platform and recommit to the party's traditional pro-life position. It is imperative that all social conservatives join this effort in whatever way they're able. So I think that that's very true. We see this in Canada, and we're going to see this in the States. But I think it just is a greater blow to those in the States because it comes on the heels of reversing Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, let me ask you guys something here, because I've been following this on Twitter. I've been following different pro-life leaders in the United States. And Jonathan, of course, you're much more connected to them than Alyssa and I, despite Alyssa and my best effort to connect with them. They're just not at all interested in what we're doing here. Maybe they should be, because we're actually starting to have more success at the inter-party level than they are. There are so many people that are carrying water for the Trump campaign that are supposedly pro-life leaders. The two exceptions being Fesser, who, from my understanding, is a canon lawyer, and then Lila Rose. And I think both of them are being very, very fair. They're being very frank. They're not being, I would say, bombastic or anything like that. They're just pointing out very plain realities. But others are seem to be carrying water. And I'm just wondering, like, why do you two think that is? Like, do you think it's because they know that this is a loss and they're trying to present it as not a loss to their supporters, which they probably rely on financially? Do they have Biden derangement syndrome that badly, which I don't think is as much of a thing down there as Trudeau derangement syndrome is up here? Is it because they're just so sycophantic for Donald Trump? Like, why do you think the reasoning is? Because I have thought for quite some time, since 2017, I've told the story a ton on the podcast. I'm not going to say it again. When Alyssa and I went to go down to meet with members of a specific political pro-life organization, which, Jonathan, from my recollection, you helped set up that meeting with us when we were down in DC. And the things that they weren't doing, that they could have been doing, that we were trying to doing and have been doing, results in this 7 years later. Like, I'm not at all surprised. And since 2022, there have been, 7 pro-life ballot initiatives that have failed in different states, including very red states like Montana, Kentucky. Like, you're losing by 10 points in Kentucky. And now in 2024, there are pro-abortion ballot initiatives that are now being proposed in different states that actually might have a good shot at passing. It all seems to me that the pro-life movement down in the United States, at least politically, has grown fat, soft, lazy. From my interactions with them from the outside looking in, they clearly do not have nearly as large of a list as Donald Trump, which is to be somewhat expected because he's, a giant media figure for the past, 40 years. But what you've been doing when you go knocking on doors and you identify pro-life supporters in Miami-Dade in the 2016 campaign, and you can't bother to ask them to spend, an extra 30 seconds to sign a petition that goes into a database and building a database, and you just give them a pamphlet and say, oh, well, thanks for being pro-life, and vote for the pro-life candidate in your county or whatever, and move on. What are you doing? Like, it's such a wasted opportunity. And now that we're seeing it, we understand here in Canada, for our organization right now, we have to take over every single EDA for the Conservative Party of Canada. We have to take over the National Council. We have to make sure that we have the right people on the right committees, that we're getting the right things passed in the policies and the constitutional amendments, so we don't have to have Garrett Van Dorlen situations anymore. We understand this and we're working toward it. We're not there yet, and we're far from it because we do not have a sufficient database, so we're working on it. But it just seems to me that the political pro-life movement in the United States is, I don't know if the reality is setting in for them, because either they're just accepting it on the chin or they don't know what to do. Anyways, my rant is over, but I'm curious what you two think about it.
I'm interested in reading this quote on Press Progress in a couple of years. Everything that you just said. There's a couple of important distinctions here to make. So there's people have different reasons for backing Trump. So there are people for whom abortion is an issue, but simply not one of the most important issues. There are people for whom foreign policy takes a massive precedence. There are people for whom economic policy is far more important. So we're familiar with this in Canada as well. There's people who hold pro-life convictions, but those pro-life convictions are not the issues that they campaign on. It's not the issue that animates them. And so there's plenty of people who back Trump because they're enthusiastic about his populist platform and they don't care enough about the pro-life plank to make a big deal about it. They're not going to expend any gunpowder in that direction. So those people legitimately aren't backing Trump simply because they're sycophantic. You have those guys, those would be like the Lindsey Graham guys. You have people who back him because they're actually populist and they actually want a sort of reset and a realignment in the GOP. Then you have pro-life groups that are working behind the scenes to ensure that things like what happened last Monday aren't happening, but also recognize that Trump is a very specific kind of political candidate, which means he demands full loyalty no matter what. And so you have a lot of people, a lot of pro-life groups, some of which signed off on the GOP platform and tried to claim that it was pro-life, which is obviously not the case. Those groups are essentially putting their signature to something in order to ensure that the door to the Oval Office may at least open several times. They're trying to ensure access to his administration. They're trying to ensure that they get some executive orders, that they get something accomplished. Because what is very true about Donald Trump is he's a very vindictive politician, and if, say, the Susan B. Anthony list comes out and runs a press release that says Donald Trump, railroads pro-lifers, releases pro-abortion platform, which would be an entirely true sentence, and I reported it myself, they would simply not have access to the White House anymore. And so as political lobbyists, they're trying to play the most prudential card that they can. I've said for a long time, one of the biggest mistakes made by the pro-life movement, and I'm not sure if Vice President Mike Pence came up with this or if it was the pro-life groups, calling Donald Trump the most pro-life president in American history was an enormous mistake because his ideological conversion was always shaky. And, the best evidence of future action is past action. He's always been a pragmatist. Populism is, I think, an honest way to describe him. And so there are a lot of pro-life groups that are basically just stuck. They're assuming Trump's going to be president again, and they want to preserve their access to hope that something can be accomplished or that some of the stuff can be rolled back. And the third thing that I think is really important historical context, and I've recommended this book to a lot of people because I think it's important. It's Marjorie Dannenfelser's book, Life is Winning. And that book is interesting because she describes how the SBA list, which for emphasis it's an exclusively political group. That's all they do. They do campaigns. They don't do the kind of things that my organization does or my friends over at, Protect Life Michigan or Created Equal. They're not trying to make pro-choice people pro-life. They're basically just trying to get candidates to vote, they're trying to get candidates to commit to pro-life policies and voters to vote for those candidates. And in that book, she basically describes how the GOP has always kind of despised pro-lifers, that you had the odd pro-life president here and there, right? Ronald Reagan actually did pen a book about abortion with an essay included by Malcolm Muggeridge, the pro-life journalist from the UK. So there were people who were sort of true believers and actually did hold pro-life principles. But the story of Susan B. Anthony list is the story of how they created a political operation that forced the GOP to become pro-life. And my longstanding joke is that if you're a pro-lifer in Canada, you have to pretend you're not to become prime minister, example, Andrew Scheer. And if you're not a pro-lifer in the States and you want the GOP nomination, at least until now, you had to pretend that you were, right? Example, John McCain, who I think his pro-life credentials were dubious at best, but he really leaned into it because he recognized that was needed of him. So now what we're seeing is this is sort of falling apart. But I think that one of the reasons a lot of the political pro-lifers aren't panicking, and I've been texting with some of them today, the reason they're not panicking is because the GOP as a de facto pro-choice party that treats pro-life activists as lepers is actually the norm over the last 30 years. And there was this really weird moment post 2016 because of people like Mike Pence and Betsy DeVos, where pro-lifers had access to the White House for almost the first time. And so I think those that aren't panicking just assume that this is not what you're saying it is, which is a systematic shift, but a reversion to the norm, and that they're going to have to claw back the power that they achieved 8 years ago and get that pro-life plank reinstalled into the platform. Where I think Fezer is right, and this is a bigger deal than many of them would think, is that since 1984, and I want to read the specific line, the unborn child has a fundamental individual right to life which cannot be infringed, has been included in every RNC platform, regardless of what specific promises are there. And it's been pointed out that, again, this GOP platform is just sort of a kind of an all caps collection of slogans rather than a comprehensive platform. And so maybe they're
just the tax.
Exactly. Axe the tax, stop the crime. Maybe this is just sort of an abbreviation, but that line, without that line, you don't have a pro-life platform. And that line, if it remains out, you're not going to retake the platform in a big hurry. So that's just a bit of historical context. There are sycophants, and we can all name them. right? There are sycophants. I think Ted Cruz is one of them. I think that Lindsey Graham is one of them. But then there are people who just don't put abortion very high on the priority list. If they ranked their issues, it would fall around 9 or 10 or 11. And then there are those who just genuinely think, okay, we've had a pro-choice GOP before. We've been treated like this at conventions before. In fact, it's rare for pro-lifers not to be treated like garbage at an RNC convention. We've always been seen as an inconvenience. We're the underdog again. We're going to have to retake it.
So my question, though, is why do this now? Because polls consistently show that Trump is going to win regardless. And it kind of feels the same way here. Everybody hates Biden. Everybody hates Trudeau. The latest poll is the supermajority for Poilievre. Why is he attacking? Why did Poilievre attack pro-lifers? Why was he so insane that MPs not speak at the March for Life? Why did he punish Arnold Viersen and say, don't come to the House of Commons until, next sitting, because you were on this podcast? Why is Trump completely gutting the policy platform of pro-life policies when the polls show that they could not really touch this issue and still win? Like, there's a difference between not advocating for a specific policy and leaving well enough alone and then deliberately attacking it.
So this is probably my most unpopular take, but I think it's true, is populist candidates like both Trump and Poilievre claim to despise the mainstream media while simultaneously craving its approval and actually taking what they have to say seriously. So where does Trump get the idea that he can't win on a pro-life platform? The New York Times, MSNBC. Where does Pierre get the idea that social conservative policies always lose? The Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail. Like, that's the thing, is that you've got these leaders who are obsessed with getting positive coverage from the mainstream media and are incredibly upset when they get accused of things that they believe to be unfair. But I genuinely think that Trump's view on abortion as a losing issue isn't just informed, to be fair, by the referendums that have happened thus far, because I think you're right. I barring a weird miracle, and look, the script writing for this latest season has been insane. So who knows what twists and turns are coming over the next 110 days or whatever. We had Biden fall apart. The Democrats turn on him. CNN go after Biden. George Clooney condemn the Democratic presidential nominee, and Trump gets shot all in 3 weeks. So you know what? Who knows what happens next? But I agree with you that Trump could run on a pro-life platform and win. I also think that this is also, we are sort of past the age of great leaders in many ways. So Trump's great virtue is courage, and so we saw him rise to meet the moment, and he looked on Saturday night like a great man. But I always remember this quote from Margaret Thatcher, which I quote obsessively, when she's in a conversation with William F. Buckley, and people keep on talking about consensus. She's like, leaders used to believe in convictions and realize that our task was to convince the people that our convictions were the right ones. And so what we have are leaders who refuse to use their bully pulpit and their popularity on other issues to bring the public along on the issues that they hold dear, that they hold in principle. And this is not something that the left has, right? Biden got put into office because he was the least offensive left-wing candidate on offer. People elected him because he was a moderate, and they were sick of the sort of the nonstop shrill shriek of the Trump train going off the rails for 4 years. And yes, the Dems had plenty to do with that, but people were just tired of it. So they picked this guy who, as it turns out, is only half alive, and he governs like a hardcore trans activist for 4 years. Right. So the left, when they get into power, they use what they're popular on to bring along all their unpopular policies, and they move it down the field. We don't have a leader on our issues. We don't have Ron DeSantis, who Ron DeSantis recognized Florida is not as pro-life as he was, but he passed a six week abortion ban. He defended it. He did it anyways. That is an example of somebody. It's an example of somebody using their bully pulpit to actually move the ball down the field. My favorite political story that almost nobody noticed was when he passed that ban on explicit LGBT graphic how-to education for kids under the age of grade 6. And everybody screamed, it's a don't say gay law. He's saying don't say gay. And he waited for 8 or 9 months and let them scream about the don't say gay law. And then he just banned it for the rest of the grades. It's now we're not going to do it till grade 12. And what was CNN supposed to say? Now we really mean it. Like, you can't say gay in Florida public schools. Like, I thought you said he did that already. We were lying the first time. He really did it this time, right? That shows a politician with strategy, with vision, somebody who's willing to push, and then somebody who's willing to persuade the vast majority of middle voters who are actually susceptible to persuasion. And Trump is the best example of a politician who can drag the base wherever he wants it to go. The number of GOP orthodoxies that have collapsed in the last 8 years is wild. Why? Because it turns out that a lot of voters just want to follow a leader that they believe in, and they're willing to go where that leader is planning to take them. But our conservative leaders across the board in the US, in Canada, and elsewhere is, there go my people, and I must follow them, for I am their leader.
Nature communicates with us in a universal language. The sunrise starts a new day. The sunset marks our accomplishments.
The most beautiful communication is where the speaker and the listener match perfectly and understand the same message.
Your future audience is waiting to hear from you. What message do you need to share?
At LaRosse Media, we fashion beautiful communications through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Create your own most beautiful message. Visit larosmedia.com and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
It's all very interesting. I would say that this particular RNC for pro-lifers is probably the worst one because you don't have that language in the platform at all. Like it's one thing to say that, like, oh yeah, past conventions, they've been beat up or ostracized or those annoying pro-lifers, but this one's particularly bad. And I think Fesser, like, it's really important to heed his words because this sets a precedent, whether you like it or not. Like we're all involved in politics, right? Obviously, Alyssa and I much more so than you, Jonathan, but you would know this, and a lot of people who are watching would know this. Every single time something is done, a precedent is set. I think of my 2.5-year-old daughter, right? Like, you do one thing one time with her, and she's like hardcore, like, Catholic traditionalist. Now it's big T tradition. Now we do that thing all the time, every single time. When we go to the beach, we go to this place, we have ice cream, we have blah, 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 because we did that one time, it's set. Politics works a lot of the same way. I mean, obviously precedencies can be overturned or changed or whatever, but it's harder to do that. Now it's going to be much more difficult, whether Trump is there or not. In 2028, when that platform committee gets around again, it's going to be all the more difficult to get that stuff back in. I think it's fair to say that all three of us here, when it comes to the issue of abortion, particularly in places like Canada, like the United States, we're incrementalists in that we want to get to the end goal, but we recognize there are various steps along the way. These are no doubt steps back. They are backwards. And that is definitely where you do not want to go. And I don't think it's acceptable to go there. I don't know the ins and outs of lobbying the White House, if it's worth it or whatever. As someone who works full time in the political pro-life movement in Canada, I don't think I could compromise on that. Like I don't think I could vote for that platform. I still don't think, like, if I were an American and I have a ballot, I don't think I could vote for Trump and Vance. I think I would write in still at this point. Down ballot for different politicians, depending, on my county and state or whatever. That's a different story. The other thing too is I saw this one tweet where this guy was saying, I can't remember if he's American or not, or he's Canadian. He's saying, if I were American, I would probably vote Trump and Vance and would hope that the bishops would deny publicly Holy Communion to Vance because he's in favor of the abortion pill, which is something that I think I'm not hearing enough from pro-life leaders in the United States. Is as hard as you are, which is rightfully so, against Biden for being a baptized Catholic, for the bishops not coming hard against him and publicly saying you would be denied Holy Communion in my diocese. The same thing goes for Vance. As someone who's now a baptized Catholic, you cannot be publicly in favor of the abortion pill. You might say, well, listen, like, I don't have the votes. I'm only one vote, which of course doesn't work in that system, or I'm not the president itself, and I can't therefore issue an executive order. But if I could, I would. Like, that's different, like, because that's living within a constitutional political reality. But to say like, oh yeah, I have no problem with this, like, yeah, now you're offside. And I'm not hearing that enough from pro-life leaders in the United States. I think people who are watching or listening to this podcast, if that was something that, Pierre Poilievre came out and said like, oh yeah, the RU46, no problem. Like, I would hope that they would expect us and our organization to say, actually, no, that's not cool.
Yeah, I mean, another thing too is that, like, I think, and Jonathan, tell me what you think about this. Like, for forever, it seemed like, for as long as I've been involved in the pro-life movement, the pro-life movement in the States has been focused on one thing, and that's been to overturn Roe v. Wade. That's what we heard at the March for Life in Washington. That's what we heard at the conferences and videos, whatever. Norma McCorvey, like all the ins and outs of Roe v. Wade. Now that that's happened, it's like they haven't really planned for a post-Roe country, because now they're on our level, whereas Roe v. Wade is overturned, but there's still a lot of abortion policies in different states. So now they have to reconcile prudence with principle. Like, should we vote conservative because it's the lesser of two evils? Like the things that we're always faced with here in Canada. And in that First Things article that came out in the last couple of days by the editor, he said that he showed the polling numbers. This is something that we always show. Like in 2023, the Gallup poll reported that only 12% of Americans hold that abortion should be illegal in all circumstances. Those numbers are very similar in Canada. That being said, a very small minority of Americans also believe that abortion should be permitted in all circumstances up until birth. Exactly the same in Canada. A very small minority believe that abortion should be legal up until birth. The majority of Americans, just like the majority of Canadians, think that it should be limited to some degree. So they're arguing that the extreme pro-abortion policies that the Democrats have, like we argue the extreme policies that the Liberals have, are unpopular, and that incremental pro-life laws and incremental pro-life laws can win votes. And that's something that should be put forward in different states and nationally as well. But it's just interesting to see that dichotomy between something that we've been fighting for in Canada and now the US kind of coming down to our level and being like, okay, we achieved this great thing, but now how do we deal with it afterwards?
So there's a couple of things on that. So it is fair to say that the entire American pro-life movement, politically speaking, has been aimed at the overturn of Roe v. Wade, because that would actually get them to the starting line, right? You couldn't do anything as long as Roe v. Wade was in place. And so even the laws that were passing, they weren't expecting them to take effect. They were just hoping that they would eventually get the right case with the right justices, and then they would get what they got in the Dobbs case in 2022. I think it's a little bit unfair that the press just in general always says that all the movement cared about was Roe v. Wade. No, it's the only aspect of the pro-life movement that would get reported on was the part of the movement that has anything to do with politics, because the mainstream media does not treat the pro-life movement as a legitimate social movement, and they're only interested in the pro-life movement insofar as it has any impact on politics, right? The media in Canada is interested in RightNow because you guys have an impact on politics. They're not particularly interested in CCBR because they don't recognize us as a human rights group. They just think we're sort of some sort of fringe fundamentalist Christian group. And so I think it's important to note that the bulk of the work done by the American pro-life movement would be, the over 3,000 crisis pregnancy centers established, billions of private dollars that were committed to alleviating circumstances, a lot of groups that were sort of on the ground doing the culture changing work, but on a much smaller scale. I think if the bulk of the money in the US had instead gone to groups like Created Equal, and there was a group like Created Equal in every major city, we'd see a much, much different country than we see now. But most of the oomph was directed at getting rid of Roe. I think that it's not even to say that it's a miscalculation. It's just they just did not expect this. So I was talking to one pro-life leader last week, and he just said, look, like the first time we heard about the direct democracy initiatives to change state constitutions was like the week after Dobbs fell. And so the way the political arm of the pro-life movement thought this was going to unfold, by and large, if there's, other people who knew about this, they didn't say so. And so I think that my generalization is accurate. Is that Roe v. Wade's going to overturn. We're going to get abortion banned in, between 13 and 23 states right off the bat. We've got solid pro-life governors in X amount of states. We've got a solid amount of pro-life legislators in X amount of states. And so we're just going to, we're going to basically pivot from the federal branch, and we're just going to immediately turn into taking over state legislatures, which they did a phenomenal job of during the Obama years, which is why you had over 360 pro-life laws passed on the state level during the tenure of what was then the most pro-abortion president in American history. And so they thought the entire task post-Roe was going to be state legislatures pass the laws, hang on to them next. And that to do that, all they had to do was elect pro-life governors and elect GOP state legislatures, which they were incredibly effective at for a long time. But the wild card that came out of nowhere was actually direct democracy initiatives that are going to test American public opinion in a way that it's never been tested before. And it's going to reveal, as it has, that even many Americans who identify as pro-life can be, as they were in Ireland, sold on the idea that abortion should still be legal in some circumstances. Otherwise, women will die in back alleys, right? If you look at the final results in the 2018 abortion referendum in Ireland, you basically have a huge number of people that vote for abortion to remain illegal in all cases. You have a hardcore 20% of the population that's pro-abortion, 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 and then a huge number of people in the middle who are significantly closer to our position than the position of the then Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, but bought the idea that Savita Halappanavar died because she was denied an abortion, and her face was on every lamppost in Dublin leading up to the vote. And so I think we're seeing that same scenario unfold in the U.S. right now, is that the post-Roe strategy that the political pro-life movement was planning to roll out turned out to be dead in the water almost immediately, because suddenly they were forced into fighting a campaign that they do not know how to fight, that it's been increasingly obvious that they don't know how to fight. Their campaign in Michigan was awful. Their campaign in Ohio was slightly better because they had some sane pro-life groups like Created Equal at the table. But they're rolling out the same campaigns in a bunch of these places where they're trying to focus on things like parental consent, which frankly nobody really cares about. And when groups with names like Right to Life campaign on, this isn't about abortion, this is actually about parental consent, we look disingenuous. They know we're lying. They know this is not our primary issue, and we lose. And so my analysis would be roughly the same as yours, Alyssa, in terms of the outcome. But I do think that the strategy that they had for a post-Roe America was identical to the strategy that they had been running very successfully throughout the very hostile Obama years. Just turns out that, as Karl von Clausewitz once said, every battle plan disintegrates upon contact with the enemy. And the incredibly well-funded abortion industry, with one half of the American political spectrum, had a surprise in store, and they're still rolling through state by state at the moment.
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised that the pro-lifers didn't go, because not all ballot initiatives obviously are pro-abortion or started or put forward by the pro-abortionists at the beginning in 2022. And I think that maybe the pro-lifers were perhaps prideful or just not not operating in actual reality of their strength of their numbers or lack thereof. I'm a little bit surprised that starting in 2022, where you had those 5 pro-life ballot initiatives in those states during that electoral cycle, that they went for that and they went through that avenue, as opposed to saying, listen, state senator or state representative from whatever district at a local state level, we got you elected back in 2012. Here we are 10 years later. This is the legislation we want you to put forward. This is the legislation that we want your colleagues to vote for. This is why we have a Republican governor. And if you do not do this and vote for this, we're going to make sure that you lose the next primary. And I'm starting to think, and I could totally be wrong, I don't know because they don't return my emails or calls, But I'm starting to think the reason why they're not doing that, and they haven't been doing that, is because they don't have those numbers. They can be that difference maker. They have a database large enough to be a difference maker to put someone over the top, but they do not have enough of a database, kind of like that Trump does, where at the next primary, because for both state and federal legislatures, you have a primary every 2 years, because you have to get reelected every 2 years, that they don't have the numbers to punish Republican state legislators that said that they were pro-life and aren't willing to do anything. To me, that is becoming obvious. But I mean, we're just operating in speculation here because we don't actually know. But all this to be said, I think this conversation is very pertinent, because what's happening, what we're seeing in the United States is, I think, Alyssa, you're right, is basically where we are in Canada. In many ways, they're ahead because they actually have states, and we don't have provinces. They have states that have pro-life legislation. But in many, many, many ways, they're behind because I don't think they're doing what they need to do in order to build up that database so that they can fight that properly. Because, Jonathan, I agree with you. If it comes to a comms campaign where it's just who can pour more money into the campaign, they're going to win over us, because their pro-abortion clinics, their Planned Parenthood clinics, have been well funded for years. And even when they are defunded, yes, some of them shut down, but some of them are able to be picked up because they have a ton of cash and reserves. They're not out there. And let's be honest, like, the amount of money that you need to put into a Planned Parenthood clinic to go and provide abortions for young women is a lot less expensive than it takes for pro-lifers to put money into a crisis pregnancy center, where you bring in a woman who's in a crisis pregnancy, and for the next couple of years help her get the proper education she needs to get a proper job, to have childcare, to have all these supports for emotional supports, and to make sure that she has access to formula and food and all this stuff for her babies. That's a lot more of a commitment than it is on the other side. Therefore, in an economy where you have scarce resources and finite resources, the other side's always going to be able to overspend. But what the other side doesn't have is a congregation, in some cases literally congregations, of pro-lifers in a physical space that you can easily build up a database a lot quicker than they can. And I believe when it comes to these specific issues, like in some states, yes, like you can have a ballot initiative that more or less bans abortion, at 6 weeks with a heartbeat legislation or something like that. Other states like Ohio and places like that, or I guess not Ohio per se, but perhaps Nebraska, Montana, even Kentucky, those states where you thought you could do that, you're going to have to start a little bit further back than maybe you want to. But when it comes to the incrementalism of passing this stuff, you have to start there and then move toward it. To me, it comes down to building the database. That's the only way to do it, and they don't have it. And this is, to me, a huge lesson for what we need to do in Canada, and I think what we are doing. I'm curious, Jonathan, I know this has gone a really long time, but for CCBR, we've talked so much about politically, but for CCBR, proportionally and comparatively to your colleagues in the United States, where would you say that you guys are? Like, would you say that you're proportionally hitting more houses, having more conversion conversations than they are in the United States, or where would you?
It is hard to make a proportional estimate. Like, we work with a bunch of phenomenal American pro-life groups, and we exchange tactics. We compare notes on which conversations work the most effectively, especially in states that are pretty similar to Canada in terms of being largely post-Christian. You're talking to a lot of people from ethnic communities, so we have those conversations all the time. I was down in the States last week, training pro-life interns. I'll be training pro-life interns again later this month, also in the States. So we're learning from each other. Where I would say they're significantly ahead of us is twofold. One, they just have more pro-life people in the U.S. Even if you look at the referendum losses, like, I always kind of chuckle. I'll talk to somebody who's, in complete despair, because they only have 45% of the state that's hardcore pro-life. And it's like, I wouldn't kill for those numbers because I'm pro-life, but like, you know what I'm saying? That's pretty good. You know what I mean? So their situation is by no means as dire as it would be in some Canadian provinces. The second thing they have access to that we simply don't have access to is the data they have access to. is phenomenal. Like companies, there is a lot of major data companies that you could just buy a subscription to, and it will tell you who lives in what neighborhood, whether they're pro-life. Like there are some states that just have unbelievable data, Michigan being one of them. And we've had to build all of that stuff from the ground up, full stop. Like in Canada, all of our data on abortion is garbage. Our abortion numbers are incomplete and garbage.
Yeah.
Our ability. When's the last time a political party actually even gathered data on which voters were pro-life? Like they're not gathering that data because they're not interested in it, which means that in Canada you have a movement that is basically has to build everything from the ground up. We can't take advantage of any existing infrastructure that we can buy into, that we can utilize. All of the best polling on public opinion on abortion is CCBR's own internal polling that we got to pay a lot of money to get, because the questions used by Angus Reid are usually garbage. They don't actually indicate what pro-life sentiment looks like. They're not specific enough. They're only interested in engaging sort of like vague sentiment that buttresses the narrative of one or another political party, right? As Peter Hitchens always said, polls aren't actually taken to gauge public opinion. They're taken to shape public opinion. And so that that is what I envy in the States.
All right. Well, I really appreciate this conversation. I want to end it. But before I do, I wanted to play a very quick game with you and Scott. Both of you don't know what this is coming. I did a little bit of research. I thought it was really funny. And it's called Who Said It? Forrest Gump or Donald Trump? So are you ready? I'm going to keep track of points here. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a quote, and you have to tell me whether you think Trump said it or Forrest Gump said it in the movie. And whoever has the most points by the end wins.
What do we win?
I have I'm basically relying on my knowledge.
$1,000.
I'm relying on my knowledge of Trump quotes here.
There you go. Both of you have seen Forrest Gump. I mean, I haven't seen it for
years ago.
10 years.
Yeah, I've seen big clips.
All right, first quote. Tiny children are not horses.
Forrest Gump?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Forrest Gump on that.
That is what? Donald Trump talking about vaccines.
Like with RFK 5 seconds ago, or?
I don't have the exact year. I will have to look that up later. All right, next quote. It's too disgusting. Don't say it. It's disgusting.
That's got to be Trump.
Trump.
Correct. Trump in response to Hillary Clinton taking a bathroom break. All right. Stupid is as stupid does.
Gump.
I'm going to say that's Forrest Gump.
That is Forrest Gump.
Okay.
I just know that saying was culturally common before 2016. So.
Okay. Okay. Next quote. Do you mind if I sit back a little because your breath is very bad? It really is.
Trump.
Scott.
I'm going to go with Forrest Gump on that, just so if I'm right, I could get the leg up.
No, it's Trump to Larry King on air in 1989.
That's amazing.
Any hostile press interaction has to be Trump.
Yeah. There was this man giving a little talk, and for some reason he was wearing an American flag for its shirt, and he liked the F word a lot. F this and F that, and every time he said the F word, for some reason, they cheered.
I'm going to go with Forrest Gump.
I'm going to go with Trump just to be contrary, because I have never heard that phrase before.
It's Forrest Gump talking about a Washington Monument war protest rally.
Oh, that actually does make sense.
It bit me right in the buttocks. They said it was $1 million wound.
Trump.
I'm going to go with Forrest Gump.
It is Forrest Gump.
Losing. I hate this game. Why can't your internet lag?
Yeah.
Okay, we have a couple more. Look at these hands. I guarantee you there's no problem.
Trump. Yeah.
We won't get into that one. And because I was a gazillionaire and I liked doing it so much.
Trump.
Nope, Forrest Gump.
Gazillionaire?
Yeah. All right, last one. This is a hard one. It doesn't really matter what the media write as long as you've got a young and beautiful piece of ass.
That is Trump.
Can that one be both?
No, I remember when Trump said that.
Yeah. All right. 5-3 for Scott. Jonathan owes you $1,000.
Check the mail frequently.
Yeah.
Oh, that was fun. It lived up to the hype in my head. Well, this was a really good discussion. I'm sure there'll be more to come. Like you said, how many more months of this do we have? And there's so many comparisons. It's interesting to me, too, because the media always says that Pierre is like Donald Trump, but he is not in the way the media thinks he is, though.
Yeah,
That's
agreed.
what's interesting. Yeah. But thanks so much, Jonathan, for coming on and for giving us your expertise and sharing with us your experiences overseas. And we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, anytime.
And that's it for this podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. And make sure that you subscribe to us on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts, so you know when the next episode comes out. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks for joining us.
Bye for now.